So we're here with Hanna Sliasynskaya and Ildiko Barthos. So thank you for being here, Ildi and Hanna.
Thank you for inviting.
How did you decide on the topic of your dissertation? I'm sure the students now, they are working on their flow charts, they're working on preparing their proposals, so they might benefit from hearing about how you came up with the topic.
Oh, who goes first?
So maybe you, Hanna?
Okay. Well, I think that like all other students right now, I was really nervous and afraid of picking a topic, and actually that fear is kind of paralyzing. And well, for me the issue was that I mainly I decided that my data has to be some kind of data which wouldn't make me travel back to Chile or back home. So because you realize that you only have 3 months to write everything and collect your data, so I decided I might get it from the internet somehow. And it was a coincidence that while reading news websites from my country, from Belarus, I just noticed this tendency of the newsmaker to select languages deliberately for certain topics. So let's say in Russian they would publish stuff on politics and economics, but then for some reason a few articles in Belarusian would appear for folk culture or national poetry, let's say. So it called my attention, and I just started looking at other websites, and so I decided, well, this will be my data. So this basically was how I decided on it. And well, I was interested in language ideologies because I took language planning and policy module. So that's how I came up with the topic.
Oh, great. And what about you, Ildi?
Well, I remember very clearly that when we started our MA program and we started the research methods module, I remember that from the very start, they already started with come up with your research project, come up with your research questions. Everybody were just baffled, like, what is that? What is a research question? What are the research questions? But anyway, they started out with that you better start thinking of a topic or an area. And yeah, I actually took it seriously, and I already started thinking right from the beginning, meaning October, and I knew that basically I was just looking for areas that always interested me, and pronunciation has always interested me. I like teaching pronunciation, despite the fact that I'm not a native speaker, and then it led me also to the area which also affects me, the fact that I'm not a native speaker, but I do teach English in native countries, native-speaking countries. So eventually, I just remember that actually I had that experience. I've always had that experience that as a non-native speaker, it always bothered me how my students will react to the fact that I'm not a native speaker, and what they think of me. Would they consider me an authority on language? And it led me back to a moment in my life when I started out teaching in England, and a student of mine told me that I could not teach her English because I was not a native speaker. And I remember how much it affected me. And it really put a stamp on my attitude towards working with my students. That was always in the back of my head. What do they think of me? And yeah, that's. I thought that maybe I will just try to investigate whether students do have an attitude towards me or towards non-native English speakers non-native English-speaking teachers who work in native-speaking countries. So they come over, they travel far, they pay a lot of money, and they end up, let's say in America or in England, with a non-native English-speaking teacher.
So it was based for both of you around your own interest.
Oh yeah.
Something that has always caught my attention, that sometimes students say, well, maybe I'm interested in researching this kind of topic, but it might be a bit difficult, or maybe I would go for something that's easier. How do you feel about that? What can you say to those students? Do you agree with that, or?
I think I agree with you, Sandra, that if you're interested in the topic, you should just go for it, because I think there is no easy or difficult topic in linguistics, because once you start getting into it, you realize how complex everything is, whatever topic you choose. So, yeah, I think that's the best advice. If you're interested in that topic and you can get someone to supervise you on that topic, then yeah, you should just go for it. Because once you actually start doing it, you will realize how many things you have to account for. So because it will end up being difficult either way.
Yes, and the best thing is to be at least interested in it, so you can you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to add that you would have to be interested in the topic, because you will have 3 months of constantly working on this topic for 3 months if you are really disciplined enough, and you will sweat in pain. You're not really writing your dissertation, and if you are not interested, you will not be. You cannot force yourself to get up in the morning and sit down for hours and work and read about something that you're really not interested in. So yes, please do pick something that you're really interested in.
You know, if you want to write a successful dissertation, a good piece of work that is publishable, hopefully, you have to be disciplined and you have to, you know, plan your work. I would like to ask you about research questions. Now the students are working on their flowcharts, so they're thinking about their topic, but also their research questions. And usually what we always say is narrow down, don't ask too general questions. So how did you address that challenge of writing research questions?
Well, I think that my research question was actually too wide now that I look at it, because it stated, how are official languages of Belarus represented in 2 news websites, which I studied. So it was extremely wide, but I narrowed it down by providing 4 sub-questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, for me at least, it was, I would say, a social process. So while I was looking at my data and reading and deciding how I'm going to analyze it, my questions would evolve, because I realized that I can't do everything in 3 months, because there are so many things to account for. So yeah, so I only provided 4 sub-questions, which indicated what exactly I'm going to do in the research.
Yeah, I also had the same thing, in the sense that I had this obvious. You have a general area or field, topic that you want to research, which in my case was the attitude of ESL students towards native and non-native English-speaking teachers in the UK. And then it is very difficult to come up. You have to break that down into more specific questions, and to be honest, I think what is good at is go and read a book or look up a book about how to write a dissertation, how to write research questions. Or when you read research articles, pay attention to the research questions, see how they formulate their questions, see how they break that down, that they have a general topic or a general area, and then how they break it down to smaller questions. And just analyze those questions, just see how they phrase them. And once again, read books about guidance books. And yeah, make use of everything that you read. There are so many great books out there in the library that help you, guide you. Just go to the chapter, how to write research questions. And once again, when you read all those research articles that you need to read for your modules, pay attention to those authors' way of phrasing their questions.
What I had in my proposal was not the same, which I ended up answering in my dissertation. So maybe also don't be afraid to change it, but don't feel like you have to stick to same questions that you put in your proposal. Discussing with the supervisor, you can change them. Yeah, so.
All right, so let's move on to the next question. How did you start working on your dissertation? So you had your topic that was based on your interest. Then you managed to come up with initial research questions. And then what's next? What was next in your cases?
Well, for me, as I said, because I had such a broad research question, I started by looking at the data. So I basically started by collecting the data, because for me it was websites, so I could collect anytime I wanted. So it wasn't so serious. So like if I wanted, if that data didn't suit me, then I would collect other data.
Yes.
Yeah, and then I started taking a closer look at and actually trying to analyze what I saw on the websites, because I also applied a questionnaire, which was based. It was on perceptions of readers of those websites. So I had to grasp an idea of what is going on with languages there, in order to ask people, so what do you think about it? So,
and did you design that questionnaire, or was it
yes,
something? Yes. Okay.
I came up with my own questionnaire, so I had to do it quickly during the first month. So like initial analysis, superficial analysis of my website in order to come up with the questionnaire. This was how I started, and also thinking about what data from the websites I'm going to focus on, because should I focus on the text of the articles, or do I only take into account the headlines and the leads of the news articles? Should I look at the images? Should I look at the videos? So yeah,
a lot of decisions. You had to make a lot of decisions.
a lot of decisions to make. So yeah, this is how I started, and also by reading a lot about on the topic, both on the Belarusian context, language ideologies, and the context, and also on the methodology, because I picked critical discourse analysis, and I didn't know how to actually do it, so I had to learn a lot. Any area has maybe a core book which provides you with the tools for the analysis. So you just have to find your own. I don't know, because for me it was for newspaper analysis. So I picked a book which dealt with, which used CDA for newspapers, not websites. It was very helpful because it had examples. So they collected data, they put it into the book, and they said, well, this is how we approached it. So if you can find something like that.
When you write your research proposal and then you meet up the first time with your potential supervisor, nothing is decided yet because you have not submitted your final research proposal, and that's when you when I met Rochelle, Dr. Rochelle was my supervisor, and she looks through my proposed research project and just mentioned one phrase which I have never heard before, because I was planning to do an language attitude test, and she mentioned this phrase which was matched guys test. I've never heard of that. So obviously, you cannot expect your supervisor to explain to you. You have to go out and research and find out what it is, really learn it. So as soon as I heard it, I just went home and started, like crazy, typing in Google live research. And yeah, that actually started me off with understanding what it was and how people carried out match guys tests and verbal guys tests. And the more I read about it, the more information I got how to design my own surveys and methodology. So I actually started working on the dissertation in a sense before you end up with all your assignments and you are ready to start writing your dissertation. I had a period in between when I really had done a lot of reading, so I really had a good understanding of at least what this particular methodology was. And once I understood what it was, then I had to figure out how I would do it, because in this particular context that I wanted to investigate, I have never done this before, and that was really the first step. And I think when you start working on figuring out the methodology, how you are going to collect data, what is going to be your tools, that's already very good, because in a sense, I find that easier. It's very hands-on. Well, of course you have to read, but once you start figuring out what kind of questions you should be using, how you should be phrasing your questions, what your tools should look like, what your tools should be, who would you use as your participants, it gives you so many ideas and so many thoughts to work on that it really keeps you busy mentally with your dissertation. And I think it's very good to keep on being busy, to keep on thinking about what you're going to do, because if you just postpone thinking about it, saying, oh well, I have other things to do, the waves will just crush on you when you start working. And so the methodology was my beginning.
And that leads to my next question, because now that you have identified key sources, read a lot, and that you have seen how authors have used different methodologies, now it's time to propose your own methodology for your study. So what challenges did you encounter with the methodology, data collection, and then analysis procedures?
Oh, well, for me, I think the data collection was quite easy because, as I said, I used websites, so you can save web pages, you can do screenshots. It was quite easy, and I also did a questionnaire, and for that I recommend Google Forms, which is very straightforward, and you get all the answers into a spreadsheet. So it wasn't really difficult, and I got my respondents online as well. So I just asked people to answer the questionnaire. But then the analysis of the websites, as I said before, it was how do I approach it? So I needed to learn about how news websites are structured, and there are not a huge amount of research done into that area, and also especially in connection with language ideologies. Um, so it was difficult for me. So there was no one whom I could adapt the methodological framework from. So I had to come up
With
with.
your own.
Yeah. So what I decided I would do. So I said, okay, when you open the website, what you see on the top is like the main area. They put all the main news, and I found some articles which said, yeah, this is worth looking into. So I could justify that. This is something important. You always have to justify your decisions, support them by previous research.
So you identified a gap that was mentioned in the literature, saying, well, this is worth
Yeah.
investigating, and then you found ways to justify
Yes.
your decisions for your own dissertation and research, because you said you had to come up with your own methodology, so you had to use a lot of information to support those decisions.
Yes, that's right. And then I said, okay, I have to classify all the news by topics and see in what languages, what topics come up. And that was also messy. Well, at least for me, the data was very messy. So I had to make a lot of decisions on my own. Um, not entirely on my own, but it wasn't very straightforward. So yeah, a questionnaire, I found it a lot more approachable to analyze, though I didn't do any inferential statistics, so just the basics.
The frequencies.
Yes, so that part I was a bit easier psychologically. So I just had to count and make pie charts. So yeah, but what I would advise is always keep in touch with your supervisor. At least if you cannot get a meeting, then by email, maybe just write your ideas about exactly what you're going to do and try to I don't know reach an agreement on that. Taking the context of your own country, then maybe you will know more than your supervisor about that specific context. So yeah, you have to know how to explain. I mean, present your ideas to your supervisor.
Your case, yes.
Yes,
And what about you, Ildi?
I think listening to Hanna, I would say that probably for me, the analysis part wasn't as challenging as for Hanna, because really I had a data collection tool and it was very straightforward. However, when I say it's very straightforward, it took me a long time to figure out and actually uh, design that tool. And it required a lot of reading uh, to come up with the right questions, to come up with the right material. Basically, for my research, I had to, it was actually very technologically challenging as well, because I had to make recordings. Then I had to embed these recordings as video files in my survey. So I had to figure that all out all on myself by researching it on the internet. And yes, I had to be sure that my questions really collected the data that would be useful for my research question. So when you design a survey, it's not just, oh, I'm going to come up with a couple of questions. No, it's not like that. You really have to understand what you want, what information you want to research. That means that you have to come up with the right questions, rightly worded questions, so the responses that you get, you can work with those responses and the data. And so for me, really, the methodology part took a long time, and that's why I started working on my dissertation, at least it was in my mind, and I did reading over the weekends, working on all different parts of elements of methodology for much longer than 3 months. So I started working on my dissertation before that. When do you start writing your dissertation? Really writing up? At the end, after you finish your last assignment?
Yes.
Which is what, in June or May? June, July, August. Yeah.
June, July. Yes. Yeah. Yes. So students should start thinking about their research now and start reading about what they want to do now.
Right. And in my case, as I said, figuring out the methodology, coming up with the data collection tool, really getting it ready for May, right? That took me a couple of months before that.
Yes. So let's move on to the writing up now, like you mentioned, Ildi. What kind of challenges did you encounter when writing up the dissertation once you have implemented the methodology, collected the data, analyzed the data, then you have all this information? How did you put it in writing?
Well, for me, I think that I started writing almost after 1 week in June, I think. So, because my supervisor asked me to, well, the main thing, the first thing is coming up with the definitions of the concepts that you study. So I think that I started writing while I was reading. I was writing and selecting the sources that suited my purpose. So I started writing at once, but my mistake was that I did not consider the structure of the dissertation in the very beginning. So, I mean, I had an idea. So you have a lit introduction, lit review, methodology, and then findings chapter and all this stuff. But while I didn't know the precise description of what goes into methodology, what goes into lit review, so I wrote, I think, 5,000 words or something like that, which is almost half of the word limit. And I sent it to Rochelle to read, and she gave me a lot of comments, basically regarding the structure.
The structure. So the students should pay attention to
So I had
the structure of the dissertation.
I had to, take pieces out and rearrange
all things.
So I think that before you start writing, you should have a clear idea of what goes where. And if it's not clear, talk about it with your supervisor and ask what he or she is expecting you to put into each section. And also, if there is any writing help that's available for you, I don't know if there will be a course over the summer on writing.
Well, there's the Writing Development Center at Robinson Library, so they can get access to one-to-one sessions. Actually, when I started my PhD, I went there, and they're very helpful. So I think students should make use of those resources that the university provides for them.
Yeah, and they know. Usually, what they say is what is expected from a master's dissertation. So, get their help, because I had some materials that were provided by a resource writing development center. So I used them in my writing. So both for the structuring of the dissertation and also phrasing, like useful phrases.
And Ildi, what about you? What was your experience writing up your dissertation after the data collection and analysis?
Yes, well, I would say that the analysis was much later. Data collection was obviously earlier, and because I had a really intimate relationship with my methodology, because I spent so much time on actually designing my tool and figuring out how to make it smooth and nice flowing technologically. I spent so much time on it that when I started writing the dissertation, and it's just like Hanna, after I submitted my assignments and I had my, when you submit your research proposal, you have to actually, there is a part when you have to tell your supervisor your timeline. When, where will you be when? And I actually followed that because I knew that I would not, I know myself very well, and I know that I can get lazy sometimes. So I really had to force myself to keep to that schedule. And yeah, just like Hanna, when the last assignment was submitted, I gave myself a couple of days of rest, maybe a week of rest, and then I started sitting down and writing and reading at the same time. You do the two things parallel. And I started with writing up my methodology. Some people might write linearly and saying, okay, I start with my literature review, and then I will continue with my methodology and analysis. My first chapter that I wrote was methodology, just because I had so much information about that, and as I said, I was so intimately close to that with that.
Yes.
That I started writing up, and to me that was quite easy to visualize, understand it, so it was easier to write. I'm not saying it was easy, because obviously you have to watch out, you have to make your writing readable, convincing, logical. So, so that makes it difficult, but still easy because you understand so much about it. And then when after I finished methodology, that chapter, then I moved on to literature review. Obviously, as you are working, you start working on a chapter, you realize, you understand yourself, how long it takes you to write 400 words. What is your capacity for 1 day of writing? What can you do in 1 day? And then, and not to mention that you already start with something, you gradually put yourself into the writing process. And to me, the best way to start that was methodology. And we went on to literature review, and analysis of data. And when I did analysis of data, you know, I wasn't really great on how to analyze data. What are the options? What statistical techniques that I could be using? So yeah, you have to go on and read up on data analysis. So you might think, well, it has nothing to do with my research. It has a lot to do with your research, because you have to come up with the right analyzing procedures for that.
Procedures, yeah.
And to understand that, which one is the best one, you have to read about it. So yes, I might have spent a couple of days on reading about analyzing data. And as Hanna said, that she needed help with structuring her dissertation. Before actually I started writing my dissertation, I read a book about how to write a dissertation. I'm not saying I was reading it from cover to cover, but yeah, there are certain chapters that I was not very familiar with, or areas that I thought I would need help with. And there are great guidebooks out there, and get ready.
Yes, yeah. So you have to get involved in this process and have a mindset of what writing a dissertation means. So it's not only about reading about the literature review that's related to your research, but also how to convey the message you want to convey with your research, and how to write a master's dissertation. Like Hanna said, it is expected from a master's student.
Yeah, and of course there are challenges. I mean, as I said, it's a painful process, because you have to get up in the morning, you have to be disciplined, and after you have your breakfast, you sit down, and you cannot I had to set my time, my alarm clock. I was not allowed to stand up from writing and from the computer for 1 hour. So my alarm clock went off after every hour. After every hour, I allowed myself to stand up, do the
Have a
ironing.
break. Yeah.
And yeah, this break might have been an hour long, but yes, get away from it. And then I went back again. But you know, the challenge is get back to it. Sit
Yes.
down and do it again.
Do you agree with that, Hannah? Getting back to.
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, because for me also, like I am interested in the topic and everything, but discipline in myself was also a challenge. So I think, yeah, at some point I decided I'm just, because I can't work from home. There are so many distractions. You can, as Ildi said, you have a break for 5 minutes and then you realize it has been 1 hour. So. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go to the library because there you cannot get distracted for a really long time. So this is how I did it. So, and then once I got really tired, then I would leave. And yeah, I try to keep the weekends for myself. Still, I would advise finishing maybe at least like printing your dissertation 1 day before the deadline, just in case.
Yes, yes, yes.
Just, yeah, do
Because
it.
anything can happen with technology, and have backup files,
Yeah,
and
so if
save
you're
your dissertation.
if you're disciplined and set schedules, as Indy said, then
Yeah.
you will have a couple of days before the deadline to print it and finish. Like everything is fine.
Great. So, any other kind of advice, like general advice, that you can give our students to produce an award-winning dissertation like yours?
Advice. I don't know. For me, the key issue was decision making on how much is not too much.
Yes.
I had a problem also with my word limit. So I also realized that I did too much. So I only analyzed the part of the questionnaire. I did analyze all the websites, but I didn't consider all the questions that people answered. So yeah, I think not doing too much would be a good advice. So yeah, and what's helpful for that is a really narrow original research question. Yeah, that's my advice. Not trying to do too much because it's 3 months what you have,
Yes.
and
Yes.
also yeah, I think that keeping in touch with other MA students is a good idea. Getting together, maybe for a cup of coffee, and maybe talking about what you're doing. And it's very good for your mental health. Not
Yes.
because
Yes.
because you will be alone most of the time. I don't know. Well, depends. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And you can collaborate together, share ideas, maybe even solve problems
yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
with each other. So that's a good idea, because you have the support from your supervisor, but also I think it's important, like Hannah points out, that students create their own communities, their
Yeah.
own networks to support each other, and to even like talk about the research issues that they have for, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes or something like that. And
Yeah, and usually, like, you can ask other students who their supervisor is. That might narrow down your research topic. So you might want to talk to the people who are doing a similar area.
yes.
So, mm.
And Ildi, what kind of advice would you give to
Well,
students for an outstanding award-winning dissertation?
well, one of the things that you have to know is, what I think is very important, is that you have to know yourself. You have to know your weaknesses and your capacity of work for work. And so when you write up your research proposal, once again you have that timeline that you have to come up with. When I came up with a timeline, I already knew myself. I knew how many words I can produce in one day. Very limited, very limited. So I divided the word count for a dissertation. I divided with that limited number of words that I can produce in one day, and one day full words, of course, with the breaks, with a lot of breaks. And then a certain number of days came off with it. Yeah. And then I also knew that I am a procrastinator. So
Procrastination, yes.
So that means that I knew that this is the plan, but I'm sure I will be my schedule will be delayed, and there'll be days when I won't be able to stick to my schedule. So I planned that no weekend work is going to happen. Of course, it happened because I knew it would happen, but I had to calculate those 3 days which I will need to work.
Yeah, so you consider some extra time
Absolutely.
in case you
you
have this procrastination moment.
Yeah, you have to be very honest with yourself. You have to know yourself. You can't say, oh, well, I can write 1,000 words in a day. Well, if that's what you know that you are capable of, that's fine. But if you, over the 2 semesters, you are writing assignments, and you will figure out that how long it takes you to write an assignment, and you have to know what kind of grade you get for your assignment. So if you end up writing good assignments, and you realize that it took you 10 days to write one assignment, then you learn from it, and you realize what you are capable of doing in one day, and you just have to fill that in.
So set out realistic goals.
Absolutely.
For yourself.
Yeah, know yourself. Be realistic to yourself. Don't lie to yourself, because it's your dissertation. Your whole MA degree depends on that.
Yes, yes, and it's their own work. So
yeah. And of course, I have a couple of words here. Discipline is very important, as I said before. Don't whine, don't cry. Just sit down and start writing, even if it's rubbish when you write, but start writing, because you realize it's rubbish what you're writing, but at least you know, oh my God, I really have to get serious at this.
Yes.
What I'm writing is not very useful and doesn't look very good. And yeah, start reading. Start reading.
Yes, reading is key. Reading is key, because it would help to the challenges that you have mentioned, the decision making, time, and organizing methodology and analysis as well. So read.
Yeah. And when you get to the point, I remember there was one time I was reading, it was about attitudes, and my brain was fried. I got to the point when I thought, if I don't close this book, I am going to lose my mind, and I'm going to break down mentally. So you have to know when to stop.
Yes.
Stop and take a break, get away from it. Start working, doing something else. Go for a walk, start ironing, dust your room, whatever, and then get back to it.
That's why planning is so important, so you can have these moments, these breaks, so you can be clear in your head and then be able to resume your work.
So you have to have a backup plan. What happens if you are sending out emails to school asking for their permissions to survey their students, and everybody's just ignoring your emails? What is then? And that was happened to me. The time was ticking, schools were not answering, so you really have to think.
Have a plan B.
Yeah.
All right, so I think we've covered most of the topics that students are interested in. So I really appreciate your time and your views and your advice for the students. I think this video is going to be very helpful for them. So we all appreciate your help in this research companion series.
Thank you.
Well, students are very welcome, and I hope, yeah, I really hope that it will help them, at least
Yes.
give them some useful ideas.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, good luck in your future research. I know Hanna is doing her PhD, and Ildiko is working with us here in some seminars. So we'll see a little bit more of them around in our school.
Good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you both.
No problem.
Bye
Bye.
bye. Bye.